Hey everyone. Sorry for going silent for so many days. I had such a cough, I just couldn't record. And unlike recording audio over PowerPoint slides, I'm not aware of how to easily put these videos back together if I want to pause. There's no pause button in the software. So luckily we have an extra 4 days before the assignment is due. Not due until Thursday night. So hopefully this video will still be of some help to you. And I'm going to cover two things. First, the main focus of the assignment, which is Django forms. And second, using foreign keys in the database. I'm going to start with that second point first. So let me go to the models in this application. It's a simple application. Its purpose is to create people and also to create relationships between people. So I have a person class. Each person has a name and an age, which are typed in from a form, and also a timestamp is stored, which remembers when this particular person was committed to the database. New feature here is setting the validators property. So when you create a field inside of a model class, in addition to setting things like primary key or max length, you can specify a list of validator executables. I mean, they're classes, but they will run. And there's a set list of them. We could go to the Django documentation and read about all of the standard built-in validators in Django. You can also write your own. Didn't look that hard to do, but for the purpose of age, what I wanted to say was you can't put in a negative number for age. In fact, I don't want 0 either. So one of the standard validators is min value. So I had to import. I could have imported just validators from core and then named them each individually, but the only validator I needed was min value. So I imported min value from Django core validators, and min value requires that you set the minimum value. Optionally, you can provide a message which will be displayed in a form, which we'll see how that works later on, in case this validation fails. So now when you try to save a person, if the age field doesn't have an integer value greater than 1 or equal to 1, it's not going to save. So I want to be able to set up relationships between persons, between people. That's what my friendship class does. Each entry in the friendship class simply specifies two people who are friends, a first person, second person. So I'm using the foreign key field type for both of them. The foreign key type is used to specify that this entry in a class points to an instance of another class. Because both of these fields, first and second, are from the same class, person, I need to give them different related names. So normally you don't have to specify this related name argument, but since both first and second are persons, I have to give them different related names. Finally, I have to specify what to do when that object that the class is related to is deleted. So what if the person on either the first or second person in a friendship is deleted from the database? What should I do with the friendship itself? And there are options. I could set the entry to null. I could do nothing. The most logical option is to say, delete this friendship. One of the two friends involved no longer exists. That behavior is described by models.cascade. So if you delete the first friend, delete this thing. If you delete the second friend, delete this friendship as well. And I'm also keeping track of timestamps on the friendships. So even though I am specifying that a friendship points to a person, it does so simply by referring to that person's key field. And since name is the primary key for person, it just stores the person's name, and it will do a lookup if necessary. I can do a lookup into the person table to find a person of that name. So when I run the application, I can looks like I might need to restart. It's running awful slow. But I can put in a person, give that person an age, hit submit. I don't think the server is running yet. Oh, guess it is. Hit submit. Now there is a person named Frank, or now there's a person named Angie. Now there's a person named Thomas. Now, of course, this form that we are looking at could have been created purely inside of a template using HTML. Could have created, some labels, name and age, a couple of input elements, a submit input element, and that would all work fine. Except I would also then have to, in my view, write all the code to copy data from the post into a new person object, and then save that person object. And if I wanted to validate that age was indeed positive, I would have to write some additional code. Here I'm getting it for free. I didn't actually write this code. That popped up the message that I specified when I defined my model class. Age must be positive. This form will also validate before data is even submitted. The form's automatically going to make sure that name is not blank. And that's done with JavaScript. But I didn't write the JavaScript. Django's generating it. So how did all this wonderful automatic stuff happen? By using Django Forms. So I created a file in my project called forms.py. Didn't exist. It's not created by default. I created a brand new empty file, named it forms.py. Could have called it anything. The name isn't important, but of course I want to easily be able to find the forms I create, so I'll put them all inside of forms.py. And then I created some form classes based on the models I defined earlier. So I needed to import my models into this forms.py, and then I created a form for each of, not so much each of the classes as each of the web pages I'm going to use. So we've already seen the add person page. I can also add a friendship. I can pick one person and another person and say make them friends. Frank likes himself. So each of those forms is automatically generated from the model that I created earlier. So I derive the friend form, the one that appears on the add friendship page. I derive it from the model form base class. And the most important, the only thing that I define within it is a contained class called meta. This is how Django expects me to describe the features of this form. So I specify which model class I want the form to be used for. Which model is it gathering data for? And then I specify of all the fields in that model, which ones should it be responsible for? I do the same thing for person. Here in person, though, I listed the field that I want gathered by name. You can go either way. You can also exclude certain fields. So if you're only excluding one field, you could say all fields exclude this one. Once I've defined these model form classes, in a view, I can specify, automatically generate some HTML code for me based on this form. So in the add person page, we'll take a look at the template in a second, but I'm querying for a list of people so that I can display all the people that currently exist at the bottom. And then when I call render, in addition to passing the request and the name of the template file, I'm also passing a context. Of course, this list of people is one of the things I pass in the context. I want all the people to show up in the web page. The other thing I'm passing is what is returned by calling the constructor for person form. And an object is returned, but it implements a string method so that if you want a string, it returns text data, which in this case is HTML code. Pardon, just got some coughs out. So we can look at that code. Doesn't work down in this pane. Let me pop it out. It generated, oh, that's not the right page either. Hold on. It generated all the code here. So let's look at the template. I specified that I wanted that form to be rendered, and there are a couple different ways a form will render, either as paragraphs, as bulleted list items, or as a table. And it definitely looks best as a table, I think. So instead of just saying form, which would generate paragraphs, or calling form dot as list, I chose form dot as table. And so right there at line 7, that variable is replaced with all the highlighted text here. Not begin and end table tags, I had to write those myself, but the entire contents of a table, rows and data items. This table then must be placed inside of a form, and as you can see, I wrote that code in my template as well. And like all Django forms, it needs a CSRF token. It was generated automatically. So that's one advantage of using model-based forms. You can also create forms without a model underneath them. Then you don't gain this advantage because you're not basing it off a particular model, but you gain the second advantage in that case, which is automatic validation. If I generate code in this way, it is automatically validated before being submitted, both before submission with JavaScript saying, hey, name's got to have something in it, and also after submission. Where the server says, wait, -99 is too small a number, and comes back with age must be positive. The contents of that table are more or less standard. All of it can be modified if you have a desire to do so, but the more modification you do, the less worth it is to use the form class. And one of the things that is provided is a class for the errors. All of the errors associated with a particular field are displayed inside of a list. A field might have more than one error associated with it. More than one of those validator class objects might say, hey, this didn't work. Validation exception. And so the name of the class associated with that list is error list. Now really that bullet point looks kind of ugly. The indentation isn't great, and I'd kind of like there to be less space around the error message. So I could write some CSS code, which I did write, commented it out. Now I'm going to take out the comments and say, hey, error list should be red, and I want no margin or padding. Since I'm not using top or left, I don't think this position relative is doing anything, but I want no margin or padding, and I don't want those bullet points to show up. Take away the bullet point and don't give me space inside of the item for a bullet point. So with that definition of error list, oh, gonna have to refresh, I guess. Not grabbing it. I'm going to reload the whole web page. It was working fine a second ago when I wrote the code. But you can apply a CSS rule to the error list to format it to look the way you want it to. I think I will, let's try it out here. No? All right, well, I'm going to refresh my REPL. See if that helps. Make sure my changes are saved. Yeah. All right. Add person. I'm at a loss. Error list. All right. Not going to dwell on it. And, so if this rule were being properly applied, the bullet point would go away, age would move over to be flush left with the side of the input box. There would be no margin after the list, so it would be pretty tight on the box, and the text would be red, and it looks better. The error looks more associated with the input data. Doesn't take up so much space, and is a little more arresting visually because it's red. Kind of more impressive to me is that the friendship table automatically queries the database for all existing people and populates a drop down for each of those foreign key fields. I already have Angie and Thomas. And so I can add a new one. And I didn't have to write the code to query or populate a drop down or a select, or then using the names grab those objects and add them to a friend object. I didn't have to do any of that. It was all automatic. My view code was simply render the friend form. And that can fail. Well, this isn't going to fail on the server side. There are no validators, but these values are required. If I try to submit without having one of the two friends picked, automatically it warns me you must select an item for the first field. Now, to make validation happen on the back end, and also when validation fails so that the data still appears in the form, When I hit submit here, this template is being re-rendered, but automatically the value properties of both of those input fields are being set to the value that was in them previously. That's done in my postcode. It's the same thing for both kinds of forms. But let's look at person since that's what we're looking at. So for person, get simply, there's no data coming in with a get request. So get simply renders a form and the list of existing people. But on a post request, I'm receiving data. I'm receiving a name and an age. So on a post request, I'm going to call the isValid method from the form object. The form object is being created based on the data that came in with the post request. I didn't have to write a bunch of assignment statements like person.name equals request.post subname. I didn't have to write any of that. I just said create a person object, a person form object out of whatever data is in this particular request. So it looks through the request for fields of the appropriate name and it sets the values of the corresponding fields. When I call isValid, the validators for each form field are checked, and if any of them fail, isValid will return false. And the errors will be added to the error list for that form object. If everything's good, then the data is ready to be saved. I don't have to create a person object and then call save from the person object. I can call save from the form object. It will automatically say, hey, there's a person inside me. I'm going to save that person to the database. Finally, since the data was good, I'm going to create a brand new blank form object, just as I did with a get request. If the data was bad, form will still contain that bad data. The form object will still contain the data that was submitted to me through the post request. And so now, when I render the form, it will, in the case of an error, still have the values set to those old values. So the user can see them and see them next to the error message associated with them. Okay, I'm going to try to change that. Submit. Tim is still there. Age is still negative. That's better. So that's three things we're getting out of these form objects. They generate the HTML that's actually going to appear in the form from the model class that they're based on. They validate based on the type of data as well as any additional validators I define for those form fields. Or as we did here, for those model fields, I defined the validation all the way back to the model. And finally, they actually serve as a container for the data on the receiving end in the post view, so that once the data is submitted, I can take that data and not try to by hand myself put it into a model class object. I just drop the data into the form and let the form figure out if the data is valid. If the data is valid, great. I can save to the database directly from the form. If the data isn't valid, well, then I want to send that exact same form back to the user. I want to render that bad form that failed to validate so the user sees the error messages and the data they type next to those error messages, so they can not lose the data entry that was correct What if I filled out 30 fields and 29 of them were right? I want to type them all again. And also see the error message right next to the fields that need to be fixed. If I had to write all that code out just using templates and views, I'd be writing a lot more code. Using form classes saved me quite a bit. Django's written that code under the hood already. I can just use it. So that's what I expect you to do for the gradebook. You could at least have forms based on model classes for student and grade item. If you find it more natural, as I did, to write the table of grades, which is one big form, just using template code and loops, that kind of makes a lot of sense. But you should use either model-based forms or just basic Django forms for the other two pages of the application. The page that inputs student data, the page that inputs grade items. All right. After you watch this, if you have any questions, let me know. Be happy to, now that I'm healthy, make another video and answer those questions. If not, looking ahead, our next task is to maintain session information so that while I am logged into an application, every time I submit from a web page, that session is being remembered and my data isn't lost, whether it's a shopping cart at Amazon or betting information on an online betting website for sports, or whatever all the various things we can do on the web. Pretty much any site that you log into has to, after you've logged in, keep track of, yep, the login happened at this time, it's still a valid login, and the web client that's sending me these requests has a special token that I gave it that couldn't have been hijacked. Kind of similar to what the CSRF token does for our forms, but across multiple submissions. And so we'll see how to do that. That's one of the more interesting parts, I think, of web applications. Very good. I will be putting that video out in the next several days. In addition, if you have any questions about this material, I'd be happy to do a follow-up. Good luck on the assignment.